Hi, we're talking about risk management within the family enterprise with Belinda Snedden from PwC. Belinda, lots of uncertainty in the world right now. How do families kind of cope with a risk management strategy that fits for who they are, but also kind of maybe ups their game a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question, Peter. I think to your point, the last 7 or 8 months have created a lot of uncertainty within the business model of the family enterprise as well as within the family itself. And during these periods of uncertainty, conversations about risk and how to appropriately identify, measure, monitor, and remediate risk are at the top of minds for a lot of families that we talk to and work with. I think that the challenge can be making that transition from talking about risk and thinking about risk to actually implementing a program or a framework for how they are going to oversee and really create a risk management culture within their family business or more broadly within their family, whether it's the family office or just the holistic environment in which they operate.
Well, it's interesting. You talked about tools, but you also talked about a culture. What if a family gets maybe a little too technical on the tools side and gets overburdened with checklists and such, and that the culture starts to lack? It's not quite embraced.
It's a natural inclination to try and measure and monitor as many data points and data elements as you think might be reasonable or appropriate for identifying a particular type of risk. But you certainly can get lost in the process and lose sight of what it is that you are trying to accomplish from a big picture perspective. And I think an important part of risk culture is arming everyone, your employees, your suppliers, your board members, your family members, with the right orientation around what are those most critical factors that you're trying to address or think about or respond to? And how can each of those individuals take a meaningful role in either thinking about it and identifying it or play an important part in really mitigating or managing the risks that both the business and the family take? So it's a mindset around putting a little bit of a risk lens on your day-to-day activities and your interactions with the family and the business.
I would imagine that there's a little bit of maybe, as you say, a risk lens, some principles and values, and maybe even some sayings or some frequently talked about, risk elements that are inherent in the business. So food safety for a food producer, OSHA standards, what have you. What kind of phrasing are you looking at? What kind of values and principles end up being talked about?
Yeah, so I think the ones that you mentioned are really important ones. Some of the others are really around sort of how the family values and the family vision is really inculcated into the business. Sometimes these risks are very much around reputation and standing within the community, the name of the business, the name of the family. Sometimes starting with a very simple principle like always do the right thing for our customers and for our clients, put those individuals first, put our employees first has been a really frequent position during the last several months, particularly as businesses have faced the challenges of how do we, continue to do business and keep our employees safe and well and in good standing. For some families, it's as simple as do no harm. And then, translating that into their business practices, their family practices, and really how they operate on a day-to-day basis.
So two things. The first is that it sounds like there's an ownership culture that's permeated throughout all stakeholders, that everyone is responsible for mitigating risk and really having that risk lens. But the second part, is there a single point of contact either at the board level that kind of oversees this or at the management level? What's that look like in terms of responsibility?
Yeah, so this is where I think right sizing is really critical because it's going to be different in every family business. Now, if you have an incredibly large organization, you may have a senior risk officer. You may have an individual whose sole responsibility on the management team is to oversee and manage a risk identification, management, and mitigation program. The reality is that's not the case for most family businesses or even, a number of mid-sized public businesses. So finding the right folks on the management team who can play an active role and a leadership role from a management and from a process perspective, and then aligning that with a culture at the board level, if there is a board of directors in place, can be very meaningful and helpful. You think about the relationship of the board and the management team, with the management team really having responsibility for the day-to-day oversight and management of risk functions, and the board being in that governance and oversight role, thinking about really the top risks, looking at the top risks, being receiving reporting on the top risks, and having that relationship really work together to create the best framework for the business and the family overall.
Wonderful. Thank you, Belinda. I think the right sizing of a risk strategy for any family enterprise is pretty critical. And quite frankly, a lot of family enterprises can embrace that because they're values and purpose driven. Thank you.